most people never think about when they recruit a board member. They think, well, I need a CEO, or I need a CFO, or I need a technology expert, or I need this or that. What are some of the things they never think of? They never, ever say, well, I need somebody that has a great sense of humor.
Wonderful. Dennis Cagan, thank you so much for being on my show. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Michael. How are you?
Wonderful. Where are you calling from?
I'm in a suburb of Dallas, Texas.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm actually going to Texas just in a few days to see my brother's newborn. So third-time uncle, and I'm very, very excited.
What city?
Dennis, in San Antonio.
Okay.
So not too far. But what I'm very excited to talk to you in these next 20 minutes or so is the fact that you've been a part of, I think, 67 for-profit board of directors, mostly tech companies, and I don't think I met anybody who was on 67 boards. So I'm very excited to talk in the next 20 minutes about what it means to be a board member and what is the role of a board of a for-profit company. But aside from that, a published author, you're an instructor in business school. So Dennis, I would love for you to just give me a really brief intro to your journey. How do you get to be on 67 seats in tech companies?
Well, I started working for IBM in 1967, and I hold some kind of a record. I worked for IBM for 366 days exactly. I quit 1 year to the day when I started because I realized the big company wasn't for me. But I was already sort of in the computer industry, obviously in the 60s. Then I got a job selling computer time sharing, and I realized that the customers I was trying to sell to didn't know what to do with a computer. They liked the idea of time sharing, and remote computing, but they didn't know what to do. So two of my buddies who were engineers and I started our first company, and it was a remote access computing application software company, and we started it in 1968.
1968 for
right.
Remote access computing?
That's right. Application software.
That's before the internet.
And
just for
long before the internet. So we and I was an avid reader. I read the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, Forbes, and Fortune. Not much else. So I knew if you had a company, you were supposed to have a board. So we had a board. Right. We created a board. So that was my first board. And then every company I've started about 18 or founded or co-founded about 18 companies, mostly tech. Every single one after that had a board. So by the time time passed, people that I was in business with knew me as having a board. So whenever they thought about a board, the only person they knew that was on one was me. So I got a lot of questions. So that's how I got involved in one company after another. They said, well, what does a board do? And I would talk about it. And they said, well, would you help me? Would you be on the board? And that's still happening today.
Okay, so that's how you get introduced to 67 different board positions. But when thinking a bit more broadly about the role of the board of directors, that's not a controversial topic, right? I mean, as growing up as a young entrepreneur now, it's very natural for me to understand that, every group that has some difficult decision-making processes needs this other group who will oversee it and sort of strategically think what is the best way to get from point A to point B.
Well, yes, but you seem to be a step ahead of most young entrepreneurs. Most of them recognize, well, I have a board, but me and my partner are fine. We don't need any other advice, or we don't want to get anybody involved because we're afraid, what if they get control, and what if we have to listen to them? And there's a lot of different arguments and questions. Mm-hmm. So they're not as educated as you are. The primary reason to have if you have a company, you have a board by default, legally.
Right.
Maybe
in the bylaws, right.
But you've got one, okay?
Right.
If it's just you or just insiders, you're getting the opinion and the guidance of insiders, employees and family and whatnot. You get their guidance anyway. They're not bringing anything new to the party. The reason to have a board is to expand the perspective that you're getting, to include highly capable other people that you respect, who can give you a different perspective, different experience, different context than you already possess to expand your capability. So it's like going out and bringing on some other people who are highly regarded in their fields as consultants, so to speak.
Right.
And if you have a private company, people don't understand. The CEO reports to the board. If you're the board, then you report to yourself. Okay.
Right.
But even if you were the only person insider on a 7-person board and you had 6 other people on the board and they all voted against you, if you own controlling interest, you just call a meeting and fire them, or you do whatever you want anyway. If the board reports to the owners, even though the CEO reports to the board. And a lot of people.
But Dennis, when I'm thinking about this, it makes perfect sense. But there must be some conflict that sometimes getting aboard too early, invested in the company, and too many different ideas and different perspectives too early can actually be detrimental to your progress. Because, in my mind, you're starting a company, in the earlier you are, the faster you have to move in order to prove yourself and to sort of break things, right? And having more people involved in the decision-making processes can just make it more difficult. So is there a sweet spot from your perspective on when it's the right time to have external people coming in with their specialty and expertise?
The issue that you're alluding to is really a factor of who those people are, not whether you have them or not. Okay. And so at an early stage, if you could afford to hire 6 of the top people in the country in certain fields like sales, finance, marketing, manufacturing, software development, whatever it is, if you could afford to hire 6 people like that, and you would, then why wouldn't you get those same types of people, if not the same people, to join the board for a few stock options and get their advice and their input? Get their
because isn't the board much longer term that you're saying you're sort of committing to have this person a part of your journey for many years down the line?
Well, that's a good question. The board is not a lifetime position. And companies, particularly in the early stage, they tend to evolve quickly. So you may the best you might be able to do is get somebody who used to be a director of something at a big company. But you grow a little and you gain a little bit more experience and your company becomes a little bit more valuable, so to speak. Then you might be able to approach somebody that has more experience, is more accomplished.
But what happens to that first person? Because what happened?
You cordially ask them to resign. You give them their stock options, and you move on. You cycle through.
Is that common? Is that common to cycle through and ask board members to leave?
It's not common enough. Too many people think, well, I've committed to them. I don't want to get rid of them. Now, one mechanism that most companies use to avoid that problem is they have terms, like a 1-year board term or a 2-year board term or something like that. Okay. And so even if they don't like the person, they're reticent to ask them to resign, even in a very cordial way. So we'll live with this person even though they're disruptive and their advice isn't any good anymore, because in a year and a half they'll be off the board anyway. No, that's wrong. Make arrangements for them to leave the board if they're not doing what you
That's fascinating. Okay, exactly. I don't think in all the board discussions that I've had around about the strategy behind structuring for a board and so on, very rarely I hear about this, what to do when you don't have a successful board. And what I'd love to spend some time on with you, Dennis, is to get sort of your to pick your brain on your experiences and what are some of the most successful parts of the board and the least successful parts of the board experience, so that I can learn from your personal experiences.
Well, the best part of a board is that you receive first-class advice from experienced experts, particularly in areas that you may not be as competent in, or you may not have other people involved in your company that know a lot about that. In the early days, you may not be able to afford a CFO. So having an experienced CFO gives you a financial perspective. Maybe there's nobody in the company that has big time CEO experience. So having a big time CEO might give you the benefit. So you're receiving best of class advice. Number 2, no one person can think of everything. And so by getting together with a capable group of board members, men and women and so forth, then you're likely to get fresh perspective, innovative ideas that you didn't already think about yourself. Like, whoa, I never thought of that particularly board members, are very good at, in one industry, of saying, well, in my business, when we face problems, we did this and this and this, and it might not be common in your business, but they bring a perspective of things in other industries, in other countries, or whatever, that may have worked well for them, and it may spark an idea. It's using the board as a competitive advantage, giving you an inside track. The next thing is that it can provide very, very impressive optics for customers, for vendors, for investors. I've put people on the board that people said, how did you ever get a person like that on the board of a startup that had no revenue? I mean, world-renowned, CEOs and 4-star admirals and all kinds of key. I got the guy that had been previously the director of the NSA to join the board of a cybersecurity software startup. So you don't know who you can get. I recruited a guy to one of my boards a number of years ago, like 15, 16 years ago. He's still on the board. He had to retire because he reached a retirement age. So he had been on the board of General Motors, Raytheon, Hewlett-Packard, and Hughes Electronics for 4 years. And he was previously president of Caltech. And he joined the board of a startup for some stock options. And he's still on the board today. It's not a startup anymore, but he's still on the board today. His experience and connections were invaluable to the company. And he's just one of a number of board members over the years. You don't know who you can get until you try. It's an honor to be asked, even if it's not something that you would consider for a variety of reasons. So it gives you, and then if you're an early stage company and you're completely controlled by insiders, whether it's a family business or whether it's a tech startup and you've got 1 or 2 or 3 founders, okay, having independent board members provides a good buffer between disagreements. An independent board member can mediate issues between founders, whether they're family issues or founder issues, and give some perspective. Like, hey, Sam, Bill's got a good point there. Have you considered this or this? So that they can soften the kind of conflict that founders also often have.
So what I'm hearing from this is that there's 2 really critical lessons there. One is that one of them is to approach, not be afraid, like shoot for the stars, approach the people. Even if they don't have time, they'll be honored for asking, even if they were the previous president of Caltech. And worst case, you'll get a no, talk to me later in a different time, right? The second lesson here is that you want to make sure that your board members are as independent of a relationship with you as possible, because they will then be able to help you help mediate through conflicts. And even if you and your co-founders are, the best co-workers in the world and you get each other, conflicts are inevitable. The decision making will be difficult, and having somebody independent will be very useful for those moments where, emotions might kick in or there's really vehement disagreement over something, right?
So, I recruited once the founder, chairman, and CEO of one of the 5 largest tech companies in the United States to a board of people he didn't ever know in a city that he wasn't in, but he was interested in their business, so he agreed to join the board. Now, he was the CEO and chairman of the company up until the time it went public originally. Then he retired. But on a growing tech company that had some similarities to his, he regretted not staying with the company after it went public. It's a very, very, very famous company. He left when it went public, but he never took it from that point to where it is now. So he regretted that. So the opportunity to join the board of a company that might have, where his input might be beneficial to get them to the next point, was just a way that he could participate again and sort of contribute something. So you don't know, you don't have any idea the types of people you can get. Now, it's a chance to interview somebody, even if they don't agree to join the board. And even if they don't want to join your board, the likelihood is they're going to say, I can't do it for these reasons, but I know somebody else that might be interested. And then you get a recommendation to them from this person.
Right. No, definitely. Okay. So, looking back at these, 67, board positions, what are some of the key things or key takeaways that you take from having a successful group of board members? I get why specific individuals will be great for the company and for the team, but at the end, when I think of a board of a company, I think of about 7, 8 people sitting around a table, and each of them alone is a superstar, perhaps, but together they have to work together to make some decisions, right? A lot of the time there's voting decisions. So what makes a successful group of board members rather than an individual?
Well, as I think you know, in 2012 I thought, what is it that I know more about than most people? I'm okay CEO, I'm okay at this, okay at that, but I'm not like the world's best at this. But what can I claim that I know as much or more than anybody about? And it dawned on me, this was in 2012, that is private companies and boards of directors. Right. And so that's when I decided to write my book, which was published in 2012, The Board of Directors of a Private Enterprise. And in that book, there's a chapter, for example, there's a chapter on how to fire board members. No, as you said, nobody ever talks about it, but it tells you how and why to fire board members and how to do it successfully. There's also a chapter about personalities and things that contribute to bad boards or good boards, and that's where you're going now. So, for example, in there I have a list of things that most people never think about when they recruit a board member. They think, well, I need a CEO, or I need a CFO, or I need a technology expert, or I need this or that. What are some of the things they never think of? They never, ever say, well, I need somebody that has a great sense of humor. Or they might think, well, I need somebody that's collaborative. Or I need somebody that can park their ego at the door.
Right.
Or, if there's personality traits, you're bringing a bunch of type A's to the board. You want to make sure that they can subjugate their own egos and listen and focus their energies for a reasonably limited amount of time each month or each quarter on solving the problems of somebody else. They need to be able to work together. If they all have to jump up on their soapbox and lecture each other, you can imagine if you got 5 top CEOs all in a room, not listening to each other, but just lecturing each other, you're not going to accomplish anything. So those people aren't suitable. And what I tell people is that depending on what you need for your board, you should be filling roles in the board that are important things for you, but that you don't feel are adequately represented within your employees and within your other, close associates. What expertise don't they have? But then I'll tell people there may be 10 people that are qualified, maybe 100 people that are qualified to fill that role in your board, but there may be only 1 or 2 that are suitable.
Right.
Qualified isn't suitable. What's their personality? How does it mesh with your culture? Because the right board would be listening, giving their input, not repeating. One of my favorite things that I've learned from this one guy I mentioned, who had been on all those big boards, is that when the CEO says, okay, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? It goes to each board member. When it gets to this board member, if he doesn't have something different to say, something that has not been said before, he'll say, I agree with what she said. And that's it. He doesn't have to get up on a chair and say, well, I think, and then repeat what everybody else has already said. Is that something very common with boards, that you end up having ego struggles rather than solving the actual problem? Yes, particularly if they haven't been put together by somebody that has some experience or some sensitivity. That can be very, very common. One time I had spun a company out of another company. I found a CEO. I set it up. We moved it to another location. Later on, that company was bought about 2 years ago for about $500 or $600 million. But when we brought in our second round of venture investors, the first board meeting we had with the new venture capital investors, we were standing around in the boardroom with all the management and the board members and the previous investors that were on the board. And this guy walked in, and I was having a conversation with the CFO at the time. And this new venture capital investor walked in the room. And he walked around the room talking to each group, shaking their hand, and very, very unusual body language. So the CFO turns to me and says, "What is he doing?" And I said, "Oh, don't mind him. He's just urinating in all four corners of the room so that everybody knows who owns the company now." Okay, that's not going to be a productive board member. In this case, they had no choice. He was the lead investor. However, they also didn't do their proper diligence in selecting who was going to be that investor to find out, well, who was going to be on the board. And I've had CEOs that say, well, I prefer these two venture capital companies because they know more about my business, where I told the CEO, no, they have a history of being interfering and not collaborative, even though you think they know more. I would suggest these other two venture capitalists, because they have a history of being very supportive of founders and management, even in tough circumstances. And the CEO went with his own choice, and within a year and a half, they had taken the company away from him. They had booted him out.
Wow. Okay, Dennis, I feel like I'm in the middle of business school here. This is incredible. And the lesson that I'm taking from this here is that, at the end, if you're building a company, it's your baby, you're working so hard to make it successful. Sometimes we get blinded by the term sheets that we get or by the names of the ventures, and we forget to do the real due diligence on our due diligence on them and understanding how are they going to help partner with us beyond the wiring of the funds to help us our burn rate. How are they going to help us make the expenses and to reach our milestones. And it sounds like really the most important way to do this is to actually learn from their experience, not ask them how they are on board seats, but ask other people who they've been on board seats and get their perspective, because you can't find this stuff on Crunchbase. You can't find it on TechCrunch, right? This is all, internal.
Also, one of the things that I spend the most time doing with early stage companies is preparing their incorporation and their governance processes so that investors can't come in and get control of the company. There's a number of things that can be done early on that can make it difficult for even if an investor gets voting control, there are things that can be done earlier on, not at the last minute, but earlier on, that can make it very difficult for them to get voting control. Beyond just getting 10 votes per share, or like in Snapchat's case, no votes for any public shareholder. There's other more subtle things that can be done, but nobody tells the founders how to do that. The idea, you asked, when do you bring on a board? You definitely bring on a board before you bring on investors that are going to want to be on the board.
Right.
You want to form the board the way it's best for you. Then you want to add your institutional investors to that board. Many people say, well, I'll form a board and I'll get a stock option plan as soon as I get investors. That's too late, because once you get investors, they then have a say-so as to who and how many are on your board. If you do it the way that you want to do it first and they join the board, then they're joining an existing board. It's a much different dynamic, because the favorite venture capital board is 2 VCs and a founder. Okay, my favorite venture capital board, optimally, is 7 board members. The founder, 5 or 6, or 2 founders, 5 or 6 outside, 4 or 5 outside members, and then the venture capital joins a board like that, and they don't dominate the company, no matter what their equity.
And you've already set the expectations and the culture for the actual board meetings. Exactly. So they're not coming in and dictating how they want. Dennis, this was so enjoyable. Thank you so much for your generosity with your time and the inspiration. Before we leave, I have to ask you for 3 words that you would use to describe yourself.
Well, I think that it comes down to, first of all, at heart, going back to 1968, I'm an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
The second thing is that I'm really, although my major in college was economics, I'm really a tech guy, starting with IBM and all the way through. I'm really favorably inclined towards technology, all kinds, but mostly IT related, semiconductor, just a whole bunch of different stuff. And then lastly, particularly over the last number of years, governance, corporate governance has really captured most of my interest and most of my time, including the book. So it would really be those 3 things that would highlight there would be 3 business words, not necessarily personal words.
I love it. Dennis, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate your time and effort. I look forward to reading. I look forward to reading the book as I gear up to start my own company later on and form my own board members. So also expect another email to request some advice from you. But thank you very, very much. Stay safe and stay healthy.
My pleasure, Michael. It's the Board of Directors of a Private Enterprise, and it's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.